Ja, jaha. Ah, det gjorde jag inte alls. Jag får starta.
Hallå, hallå?
Det är inte sabbad.
Can you hear me in the
Hur
stream?
funkar den här igen? Hello. Den behövde en omstart den också.
Hallå, hallå, hallå? It's still working with this?
Hello. Ja, den här var låg va?
And this is working as well?
Hello. Ja, den hörs.
Hallå, hallå? Not yet, but soon. Should go. Yeah, it's there.
We have to use that one. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes, yes, yes. Of course, of course. You're the boss. Yes. Nice to meet you.
Active. Okay. You can use that and just share it around. Hello, hello. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. We are just doing a very brief opening where we would like to thank very much Region Värmland and the University of Karlstad for being so kind to host our eighth AEBR cross-border school. On behalf of AEBR, welcome to everybody and thank you very much. And now I will pass the floor to our co-organizer, Emmanuel Bunelgelli.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Emmanuel Bunelgelli. I'm the lead for this Borders in Globalization network. It's made up of colleagues, actually not just academics, because half of the research partnership is with organization with the AEBR. We work in the Arctic, and we work across the world in Latin America, in Australasia, in Asia, in Africa. And we have a big network of scholars, obviously, to do this. And we work around 6 different areas. I'm not going to speak for even 10 minutes, but we work in 6 different areas that have to do with borders. So we look at the history of borders, we look at cultures in borderlands. We also look at how borders are governed. So we look at the governance, we look at trade issues across borders, we look at ecological issues and at security issues. And so today, most of the work is about security issues, and I'll detail this a little later. And with that, thank you very much. I'm delighted that we've been able to organize the school here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And as some other colleagues, thank you very much for making such a long trip to stay with us with a few hours. Okay, we would like also to thank you very much our proper host today, physical host, which is the University of Karlstad. We are creating, I think, a very interesting network of universities. So we are very pleased to give the floor to Mr. Leonardo Iguaya, who will make opening on behalf of the university.
Hello, hello. My name is Leonardo Iguaya. So please be welcome to the sunny city of Klarstad. Klarstad University is a quite recent university. It's completing now 25 years this year. And I'm representing here the computer science department, but there are many other departments that are quite front runners in research here in Europe and also globally, like business and administration and so on. So we also have some of our compare partners here. We do a lot of collaborations, which I will also talk. And yes, just be welcome. And if you have any questions, anything about the university that you need some guide, I'm the one that you can talk to.
Thank you very much, Professor Iguaya. And then last but not least, we will give the floor to the region, to Värmland. With us, we have Erik Ebestam, who is also the president of the Regional Development Board of the region. So now the floor is fully yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I have maybe. Okay, I have the honor to welcome you to Värmland. You said president, and I think I wrote president, but chairman is for president in this. I think it sounds nicer, right? Yes. So now I'm president of Region Värmland, a part of it. And we have some slides to it too also. As I said, it's very nice to have the honor to welcome you to our region. I hope you have a nice day so far. I am a politician, but I try to keep myself short, if that's possible, so you can go on to the rest of the schedule. Can take the net. Okay. So here we are. Värmland is located between 2 growing capitals, Oslo and Stockholm. And in this area, business is growing on the sustainable level. And we like to see this is as a part, in a region, as a region that likes to have a great success for businesses in the sustainable area. Because we are focusing on growing part of the bioeconomy. And as we said in our vision for Region Värmland, we like to have a sustainable Värmland that changes the world. And this is how we look. We have 16 municipalities, around 283,000 inhabitants. We have the Great Lake in the south. I hope you will able to see it, because it's a very big lake, and we have 22,000 islands in that lake. And as you will notice when you leave this region, it's a lot of forest. 70% of the land is forest, and that is a great resource for us in the when we work for sustainable development. We need that forest. We need to use it. And you're here in the regional capital of Karlstad and on Karlstad University. Oh. Okay, we're moving the same slides here. You're in charge. We'll fight. As I said, we have strong industry sectors and key clusters. Forest-based bioeconomy, that is our main focus. Of course, we have the forest, so we have to use it. We also have advanced manufacturing and steel industry, and that is a great tradition here in Värmland that we are very good at. We are also trying to find our way in health innovation. It's a very important issue for us, as I think for everyone, to be better at that, because we have a demographic. More people are getting old, less people are going to work, and we have to we have to solve that situation, and we are thinking that technology is a great deal in that development. Also, we have a destination industry and culture. Of course, when we have a great forest land, we like to use it for businesses also in the destination industry. We also work with resilient societies and innovations and international research on service innovation. I would like to have this one. This is what we do in Region Värmland. We have the health and healthcare. That's the greatest deal of it. We have Daniel here ahead of our healthcare. That is, I suppose that you know, it's a great challenge in every way. We also have a responsibility for public transport, only here in Karlstad and all over the region. And then we also have culture and education. And then we have region development. That is my responsibility, and that's the fun stuff. We work with the really fun stuff, like being here today. And region development, that is about everything. It's working together with the businesses and also working with issues like infrastructure, broadband, energy. Energy is a part of... Oh, you're a little bit too fast there. We are online also, so there is a little bit connection there. But region development, as I said, the energy sector is something that is growing on us. We need more electricity due to the changing of the industry when they change from fossil fuels to mostly electricity, and then we need more electricity, and that is a great challenge for us to kind of take care of that. We didn't practice this, you know, notice that. It's okay. I think I just have one picture left. No, No, I think that's it. So bioeconomy and energy is two of our greatest challenges. And I think that I would like to enjoy to participate in this school a couple of hours here during this day. And then I think that you are going by bus to Trysil. And then you will see a lot of forest. I think that Helmik is going to tell you about every tree on the road. And you will see mostly part of Värmland during this stay and this trip. And I hope you will come back, because this is a nice place to stay. Again, welcome here.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is the microphone working? 1, 2, 3. Otherwise, I use the hand microphone. Okay. What about now? Okay. So it's me again. I will talk about the privacy and security research group, which I'm as part of the computer science department here. And security-wise, I will talk about cyber security, right? Not so much the physical part, but so my name is Leonardo. If you have any questions, you can also contact me via email. Just feel free to reach out. Now I'm trying to use this. It didn't work. I can also, yeah, maybe just press the button from the mouse. If, I mean, yeah. So we are a significantly big group. We have 3 full professors, guest professors, many docents, PhD students, many industrial PhD students that we have more recently, so working directly with companies, which is quite good to have that reality check when we do research and really have high impact things going to the market. I'm representing today Simone Fischer-Hubner. She's the head of our lab. She's not here physically today, but to some extent she's here because she's in the banner there. You can see a picture of her with 2 of my former PhD students, colleagues. So she's always here with us to some extent. Yeah, we can, yes. It works now? Or? Okay, perfect. Our group has 3 core research areas. One is usability, making sure that if you have any security or privacy appliance, that people can actually use it, because it's very easy to misuse and have mistakes when using cybersecurity and privacy tools. So we deal with usable privacy quite extensively, but we also work in privacy enhancing technologies. Here you have organizational and very technical controls, cryptography involved, and network security, security of communication, and things like that. We've participated in many EU projects, many local Swedish projects in the past more than 20 years since privacy and security group has been founded. 2 projects that I could mention here more briefly that really deal with this building a cybersecurity capacity in the region. It's the CyberSec Swedish industrial graduate for cybersecurity. We have a consortium of universities and companies, and we are doing research like hiring PhDs and doing their projects together. And then there is also the cross-border cyber capacity, which maybe Ingrid is the best to talk about, which is also about not only fomenting cybersecurity at a university and industry level, but since from the basic education, I think it was really interesting to have interaction with high schoolers and see that they are so excited about going to the cybersecurity field. Actually, here in Klarstad, cybersecurity was ranked #1 among the students when they think about going to computer science, information systems areas. The Cyber Campus is one big project that has been established here in Sweden with many universities. And it's basically this coming to the realization that the universities alone cannot tackle the cybersecurity challenges that we have as a country. So there needs to be cooperation among the universities and also industry partners. It's a quite big investment that has been done since last year, and they will put another around 40 million added every year for this consortium of universities. And we are actively now hiring PhD students, postdoc researchers. There is a physical cyber campus facility in Stockholm too that is shared among the partners and organizations. So that's one of the projects that Simon was actually one of the founders of the Cyber Campus initiative here in Sweden. So it's quite near and dear to our heart, the Cyber Campus here in Karlstad. I would also invite you to 2 events that are happening next month. One is NordSec and Cybersecurity Divas. So if you want to know more information, you can also follow us in the LinkedIn page or our website, and you'll see more about these events. How much time do I still have? 25? Yeah, so if you need me to stop, you tell me to stop. Now I'll talk about the research that I have been doing. I do cybersecurity and privacy in healthcare field. And some of the studies that I've done is targeting mental health apps that were quite highly used during the past years. They continue to be used more and more, right? This is the scientific publication if you are interested in knowing all the details. I like this type of research because it really gets the students hooked into the cybersecurity, right? Really doing this ethical hacking part, getting hands-on experience and kind of getting your hands dirty in the cybersecurity field. I have a quite good response when I have this type of projects with the students. And that's why I also like to do it. And I see, like, if you really want to build cybersecurity capacity, we have to involve them early on, and also during their education at the university, convince them to come to cybersecurity, come to privacy, let's deal with this type of problems. This paper was published in 2023, but one of our master students just published another paper that's a similar type of study. So last month it was accepted. So it's nice to see that they have so much like interest in doing this type of research. Now he's working for Saab Bofors in the defense industry. Okay, I was doing research specifically on mental health apps. I think many of you might have come across like an anxiety app, a depression app, a meditation app, these that are becoming very, very popular, especially after the pandemic. I'm not sure if you have very quick eyes and you saw something that caught my concern when I was researching, is this part here. So if you see there is in the news, I have a penguin in my pocket, which I confident all my feelings and fears. As a privacy researcher, it's like, oh my God. So you trust this app very much like you would trust a friend or a therapist. Like, what's the consequence privacy-wise of using such apps, given that they are basically free, right? So who is paying for the app? So this becomes quite a interesting topic for me, at least in the part of cybersecurity. If you think about, that's a very simplified diagram. If you think about how these apps work, you have a user that has the app on their phone, and these apps talk to a certain company that provides the solution. But it might be that it goes direct to cloud services that are completely separate, right? So there is a lot of levels of control here. Maybe at this level, the user has some control. As soon as the data start going to the Google's and Microsoft's services, the user loses control over their data, and the developers, the companies also lose control. So when you deal with mental health apps, it's like, it should be considered high risk, right? And if you're gonna use Amazon, Firebase, Facebook, Google, it should be very, very carefully chosen, like each of the APIs. So that's what I like to just emphasize. When we do analysis, we try to go through all types of privacy threats. I will present some in the presentation, but you don't have to go crazy about it. And if I'm talking too much technical stuff, you can also look at me with a sad face and I will stop, I promise, I will stop. So to do this type of analysis is the ethical hacking that I was talking about. So you come with a methodology, we're gonna select apps that are highly used, top ranked in the globe. And we're gonna go through a battery of tests, penetration tests, security and privacy tests with many different tools there. Many different tools there. And for each of these tools that we're doing penetration tests, we compile a list of problems that we find, and then we start enumerating them exhaustively for each of the apps. Our third step is responsibly disclosing these to the companies, so the companies know beforehand that we found problems, so they have time to react. Normally, we give like 3 to 6 months for them to react, and then we can publish the results. Normally, we still publish de-anonymized anyway. But that's an overview of our methodology. I mentioned that if you really want to think like a privacy professional, you can also use these taxonomies. I'm not gonna go crazy about it, but there is one that's very famous called Lindum. And if you're interested, you can see it's basically, they use a tree of threats, so you can exhaustively enumerate the threats in different categories. It's quite useful if you are not that savvy yet. So for the study that I presented, we had 27 apps. They are top ranked, as I mentioned. It means that have been downloaded at least 100,000 or more, each of the apps. So we wanted to select the ones that are high quality, and that if there is an impact in cybersecurity and privacy, there is a large user base that will be impacted, right? There's no point evaluating an app that has been downloaded just like 50 times. So that's our approach. And among these apps, you have several mental conditions that they are covering, like anxiety, depression, but also suicide ideation, self-harm, PTSD, addiction, and so on. So these are very serious mental health apps. They're not just a meditation app that helps you with background sound, you know? They can be quite serious. So they should be considered high risk. To me, like from the beginning, they should be considered as high risk. Just running one of our most basic tools, we find that these apps, this is called Mobile Security Framework. We found that from the beginning, this is something that takes 10, 15 minutes for a developer to run and get a compilation of the most critical things. 74% of the apps were categorized as critical risk, which is like, oops, that's a problem. We need to look further. And 15% is high risk. So just by running this tool, MobSF, we already got like raised eyebrows all around because, okay, if the tool that's one of the most basic is pointing to common problems, very fundamental, elemental problems, we have to attack the apps even more with more different testings and so on. Some of the findings that I can mention, a lot of them use dangerous permissions. So it means that when they are running in your mobile phone, they're using more permissions than they should. Like, why would an app need the microphone if it doesn't use the microphone? Why do they need access to all your media and photos and videos? Why do they need to access to external storage if they really don't save that much information? So we found that it was all of these apps use these dangerous permissions, and we investigated to see if there is a purpose behind it. And most of the time, like every app had 2 or 3 permissions that had no purpose behind it, really. It's just like over privilege. We also found a lot of, this is maybe the more technical part, a lot of cryptography done wrong when they are implementing, because we can reverse engineer the code and see what type of cryptography they are using in their source code. And we see basic problems that we teach our students. Please don't use this cryptographic cipher because it's broken since like 2000, or don't use this combination with this encryption mode and so on and so forth. So we still see rather high prevalence of this type of basic security problems. Here is an example of using a randomizer that's not safe enough. So for cryptography purpose, these random numbers are not safe, or they are not secure, and so on. A lot of these apps, they also hard code sensitive information, like the servers that they are accessing, credentials to access the servers, like which we call API keys, application programming interface keys. So sometimes it's not so sensitive. If you have like, Google has a service called Crash Analytics that helps you to report if the app crashes. You will save the logs, and then the developers can read these logs and see what happened. It's not so critical if someone gets a hold of this information, but it's still like, you can still start sending garbage to this service if you know the keys, you know the API keys, and then you can consume resources that the developers will have to pay, right, for these type of services. We found also basic problems that they were, when transmitting over the HTTP, if you access any website, you see that you access HTTPS, something in the URL, right? So if you put in the URL information like that, many of the network equipments and things in between your computer and the server might be able to read this information here, especially at the server side. So if you put information in this URL, at least at the server side, you're going to start logging this, and you have personal information. Now you are logging personal information in your server, and you just lose control as well, because it's not only in the database, it's also in the server logs. and who is accessing and dealing with these server logs. Another thing, if you look into the network traffic and how the apps behave, it's quite easy to see that it's a journaling app. So you can infer that this is a service for probably mental health. You're doing journaling for yourself. And you can track the, extract this information from the web traffic logs. It's quite simple. So that basically means to me is like, if suppose I have a mental condition, I'm dealing with suicide ideation, and I installed an app about suicide ideation in my phone. Just this information, they don't need to know my name. They don't need to know where I live. They just know that this phone has a suicide ideation app installed. That's, for me, in my point of view, privacy-wise, there's already enough leakage of information, right? They know that this user deals with mental health problems that can be quite severe. So you don't really need to go too far to start linking the dots and linking the information and being able to at some point expose the users. Here's also some examples where they are sending personal information for these cloud provided third-party services. So we can see the logs and see that their email are being leaked to these services, and they don't really need the email. They could use just like a random ID or something like that. And even when they use pseudonymized random IDs, anonymous IDs, it is still very easy to link all this data. If you have access to the traffic, you can see that this is all pointing to the same server, and all these connections are using the same anonymous IDs. So you can start linking it across platforms. So there's also a very hard problem in terms of privacy, because people normally don't use some anonymous communication channel like a Tor or something like that. But this is also easy, trivial to extract. And we saw that there are the most common third parties that these apps were using are expected, Google Crash Analytics for Branch.io, which is more for advertising, Facebook, which is also more for advertising. So why these mental health apps really need to rely on advertising as a revenue stream? It's like maybe that's not the best way to go. So we see that, to the very least, this should be very clearly communicated to the users, right? That when they are using the apps, they are being profiled, and they are being profiled for advertising. Maybe that's why, if you are using, maybe you experience that. You're using an app, and then all of a sudden in the Instagram or Facebook, you start seeing ads about the same app or about competitors of that app. It means that they know that you have a particular interest, and they can start targeting you in different social media platforms, right? So it's not interesting, right? To let people know, like Facebook know that I was using a mental health app. It's to me, that's not fair for the users. Yeah, at least if they're not fully informed about it. And then even inside the mobile phone, you also generate a lot of data. Even if you're not sending information out of your mobile phone, the app also generates what we call logs, system logs. And these system logs, if you're not securing, configuring your device appropriately, it means that all the other apps have access to these logs. So now, basically, if you have Instagram, Facebook, Google browser or something, they will have access to these same logs, that they can see what you're doing when you're using the mental health apps. So some apps had these problems that they are logging their operations inside the mobile phone, which can, again, becomes another data breach. We also try to decrypt all the information that the apps store inside the mobile phone. And basically, we didn't have to decrypt, because most of the apps, they don't encrypt anything. So we can see just a lot of plain text information that's saved in the phone, and sometimes saved at external storage, which means that all the other apps have access to this external storage. Is not only for the app. So we see basic problems that we also tell our cybersecurity students to not do, especially if they're dealing with mobile health, mental health applications. One thing is if you have just a step tracker that you are saving information. Another thing is if your mental health journals, right? And we also examine the privacy policies to see how transparent these apps are when they communicate to the users. And we see a lot of unfair clauses in the privacy policies, where the most common is this contract by using, which is completely unfair. In my point of view, you need explicit consent if you're processing mental health data. It should be fully informed, explicit consent, not just like, you install the app, now we can collect everything we want. But contract by using is one of the most common types of unfair clauses that we saw in the privacy policies. But there are more like unilateral change. I can change, I don't have to notify you, you just have to deal with it. Like, also very unfair from consumers' rights standpoint and also privacy. How much time do I have? 10. Oh, okay, great. Then we have time. Yeah. And as I mentioned, we do the responsible disclosure, right? We compile a list of all the problems we find, and we communicate to the software developers, data privacy officers, like, hey, by the way, we examined these in a research project, and here's a list of all the problems we found. And then we have like 74% of no replies at all, right? In all fairness, they are not obliged to reply to responsible disclosure. But there are some that replied, which is quite interesting to see that they go point by point in what we compiled as problems, and they explain how they are going about to solve it. So this is very good for us researchers to know that something has a real impact in the software developers. And we also got some feedback that they appreciated it because it's a very well intended. We don't publish the company names, right? We publish the overarching findings, like what the prevalence in the whole group of the 27 apps, but we don't single them out like, this company is bad, this one, because then it's very unproductive as well, right? Because it's not a win-win situation for anyone. Some of the recommendations here, I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you're thinking about cybersecurity and capacity and having to renew and be agile in this education process, people that are already working and they need to get new abilities, we really need to be, when talking to software developers, be aware of this unskilled and unaware. I don't know how many of you know about this Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you heard? Yeah? So this is something that maybe Dunning-Kruger effect is when you lack a specific skill. And because you lack that specific skill, you overestimate yourself, thinking that you are above the average. It's like if I'm a really bad driver, and then I think, no, I'm an excellent driver. It's like why people that really lack the skill overestimate so badly their level of ability. And maybe you wouldn't overestimate your security proficiency because you were maybe not computer scientists. But a lot of computer scientists, people that learned about coding, know more about the platforms, they tend to overestimate and think that they solve the security and privacy problems, right? It's a quite interesting phenomenon that you see in the security and privacy. And when you talk to software developers, you're really like, did you really look into this app like carefully? Do you really know how to encrypt the data, how to set configurations? Then they, maybe I don't know, right? So this is something that we have to be persistent. When we teach our students as well, we have to make them aware that here you have just the basic information about security and how to do it. But when you go to industry, know that this is the very basic. This is like a grain of sand. You still have so much to learn, right? So this is one interesting thing. And Another thing that I find particularly important is that the health practitioners, they need to also step up a little bit and say, like, we need to recommend reputable apps, right? Apps that we did a quality review and that we know that they are secure, and then we can start recommending. That would be very interesting from the user side, because they tend to be the most misinformed. So having these apps that are certified or recommended by mental health practitioners, I think it's also one way to go. With that, I think I open for discussions and questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. My question has to do with privacy and the data that's collected. You talked a lot about the apps and how they collect the data, but that data, once collected, moves to various places, including different jurisdictions, crosses borders, et cetera, stored elsewhere. What rules apply to that data once they actually cross international boundaries?
Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot give legal advice. From what we talk to the software developers, this is one question that we normally ask, like, where you store the data. And if the app is provided here in Europe, we hope that it's in a server here in Europe, right? It's not really going to US. Because if it goes, then you have a problem, because in the US, if the government wants, they can just like press the companies and ask for the data, right? And they don't have to notify the users about it. The companies just need to comply to security reasons from the government. So this is one of the things. Some of the apps, they put it in the consent form. Your data is going to US. You should be aware of the US regulation. And then the user like, okay, do I have a choice, really, right? But for the software developers, we normally, if you stay inside Europe, you are GDPR compliant, and you also reassure to your users that because the European regulation is a little bit stricter than the constellation of regulations in the US or North America, for instance, that you're gonna have more due diligence when storing data. But the companies, they can transfer data, right? They will be non-compliant to some degree if they're providing a service in Europe and then they just start transferring data to US or other countries. They will be non-compliant. So the data protection authority should action them. They could still make this abundantly clear to the user, so then they don't become non-compliant. Yes.
I also have a follow-up question. I thought the last slide about who should think about what. So I'm curious, did you do some kind of follow-up or check how much of those apps, specifically because it was like 1 million downloads, how much of those are actually recommended by health practitioners? And have you considered maybe building upon that one and focusing on maybe creating some kind of quality assurance of health practitioners should feel, okay, this I can recommend? Because I don't think they sit and think about privacy if someone has said this app is safe.
Yeah, no, we didn't do this specific type of follow-up. What I can say is that some of the apps, they were like provided by a mental health association. I'm not going to name any of them, but there were some therapy apps that they have a healthcare organization behind it. So this is kind of the type of recommendation that already helps. But there were, most of them, they are developed by independent developers, right? The companies that are putting in the market their app, another solution, and these really need to be quality reviewed, not only privacy-wise, but also, are they giving evidence-based information there? Would the therapists agree with the information that you provide in the app? And also the security and privacy, and if they are compliant and so on. But that's a good idea to have as a follow-up.
Thank you very much. I think you addressed a very interesting question in the very beginning when you said who paid for them. So who made all these apps? And is there a pattern to it? Can you see something? Are there like 20 out of 27 have links to or the developers are also doing work for these companies, or is there a pattern to, can you see anything?
Yeah, we didn't see the links to China or any other type of state like that. But the pattern that we see is that you have these companies putting the apps in the market and they want to provide a solution. They, when I talk to developers, they're very well intended and they have this motivation of helping people to deal with mental health problems that maybe sometimes they themselves had. But the problem is who pays for the service, right? They cannot just publish an app in the market and maintain it for free. They are not a charity organization. So unfortunately, they will go to, because if you put a price, then you also have a smaller user base that's willing to pay for the price, right? So using advertising is still the pattern, right? The business model. And how you deal with this type of business model that's like fundamentally wrong if you think about mental health, right? So unfortunately, most of the app developers, they are still relying on advertising as their revenue stream. And the users are informed to the extent that they will read a banner and say agree at the beginning. But I doubt that the users truly know what's going on. Yeah.
Hi, Katrina Mullen from AEBR. Thanks for the lecture and thank you for having us here today. I'm specifically interested in any comments or reflections you might have about the matter of the European health data space regulation. The reason being that as I was listening to you, I mean, obviously a lot of countries have to get ready now for cross-border patient data exchange, which is a thing that underpins cross-border patient mobility. And I'm wondering, does extra care need to be taken in terms of the sort of education of member states and health authorities, not just about the exchange of patient data from the patient records, but this idea of, you know, apps that patients might be using as part of their outpatient support? Is that, do you have anything you want to comment on that? I'm not an expert, by the way, that's why I'm asking you.
Thank you for the question. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on European health data spaces either. As you mentioned, it's not a lot of these apps. Some are clinical journals that you're actually talking to a therapist, so it will follow any healthcare organization regulation, right? It is part of the medical journal or mental health medical journal of the patient. But these were just a few apps that were like talk to a therapist type of apps. Most of them are private companies and they are not really marketed as clinical, right? Or health data in the sense of being part of a health journal or things like that. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was quite interesting. Now we have Neşe Tuna, who's an innovation manager at Compare here in the region. And she's going to talk to us about collaboration for cross-border cyber capacity building.
Thank you. Yes, welcome to sunny Klarstad, even though it's not very sunny today. But yes, as I've been presented, I work for Compare Foundation here at Karlstad. We're based here and we have collaboration with Karlstad University, as Leonardo mentioned. So some of the slides might sound similar. So today we'll be talking about collaboration for cross-border cyber capacity building. I'm experiencing, I think, where should I point it at? Yeah. No? Okay. That's, yeah. Let's, no? It's a beautiful picture of Karlstad, at least. Yeah. Let's try again. Yeah. Let's do that. Yes. Why? Before working with innovation, and I was working as a journalist and an editor. And as such, I've been drilled about the 5 W's. So I could see them in my dream, and I've been using them in my work ever since. And then later in my life, I actually started working with innovation, or first got interested. And as every single person, or not every, at least most of us, when you get interested in new topic, in new domain, I went on TED Talks and I listened to Simon Sinek about the, good, some people that are, so I listened about the golden circle and how we should focus on why, how, and what. And why has been very driven in my personal, but also professional life. So why do we need to work with collaboration across borders and about cybersecurity and capacity building? I think the answer to this question, we have the experts here, right? That's why you're here, part of this event today. But why here in region Värmland and Inlandet, we needed to do that. And I can talk about those whys at least. One of them, of course, is the universal problem of we don't have enough capacity, we don't have enough experts, we don't have enough talent about cybersecurity, and we know it's a very, very big problem given the geopolitical situation we live in. And then, of course, there is fragmented collaboration. We see that both public sector and private companies are facing the same challenges, but they do not cooperate. Everyone is closed, specifically when it comes to cybersecurity problems. Everyone wants to keep the solutions for themselves, their know-hows, they're afraid to share information, they're afraid to co-innovate. And then what we did, we asked ourselves this question, and we did some kind of mapping. And what we found, I find it very interesting. We actually have a lot of experts, both in Inlandet and in Värmland. We have extreme amount of experts. And here we had just one talking. The Privacy and Security Research Group is known internationally, not only nationally. I dare to speak, and I dare to speak that even NTNU in Inlandet is famous also internationally about their cybersecurity expertise. And then we had a lot of industries that are very working with this domain. And on top of that, apparently we have a lot of companies and more startups coming into this and growing into this domain in our own region. And this type of cognitive dissonance is what made us realize that we need to cooperate together in order to use what we have and make it better. So that was our why, and now it works. No, was it you that? Yeah, but I'll just do, yeah. We're going forwards, but we're clicking backwards. It's a tango. Yeah, and that's how this project came to life. It's an Interreg Sweden-Norway project. And it's called cross-border cyber capacity. And as you see, and Leonardo mentioned, we have data scientists and information systems and even business parts of both NTNU, which is Inlandet, Technical University, we have Högskolan in Inlandet, we have Klarstad University, we have also public sector with us. And yeah, we at Compare Foundation are the project owner in the Swedish part. And then we have Digital Inlandet, which is part of one Norwegian cybersecurity cluster. So what we do, we work with capacity building and cooperation. That's our motto. Now let's see if I do it backwards. Yes. And what about the questions? What are we doing? Well, as you see, we started already 1 year ago, and now we are in around the middle of our project. And we usually say that we work with 3 pillars. And the first one, yes, it's working, is cyber growth. And at Cyber Growth, we work with developing cross-border model for scaling up companies. And here, I think what we most focus on is the public and private sector collaboration and cooperation. So this is the domain we decided to focus on. And then we have Cyber Academy, where we're developing, of course, structure for collaboration and knowledge transfer between academia, business, and of course, public sector again, because cyber is important everywhere. And then there is another layer into the second pillar. The layer is about working, collaborating together with the universities in creating, how to say, more flexible educations or seminars for upskilling or reskilling. So we are focusing on this part. We know universities are very good at education, but we need to collaborate in making it more agile, specifically in today's world. And then we have the third pillar, which is building strategic cooperations. You cannot co-innovate if you don't cooperate. So we work there in finding new ways of working, new ways of cooperating between academia, public sector, and private sector, and hubs, of course. And as I mentioned briefly, we did map our ecosystems. We have the ecosystem in Värmland and Inlandet. They look pretty similar, but something that we noticed is also, and it added a new layer to our cooperation, is that behind all those bubbles, and of course there are a lot of companies behind them or organizations, what we found is that sometimes, more often than not, there is a better cooperation across borders than it's internal in the region. So you can have like 2 universities cooperating very good, but when it comes to business, industry, and university cooperation in the region, it's not happening. So this added a new layer of our thinking. We need to work cross-border, but we also need to work cross-sectors. And one way of working with that, we started something we call for Challenge Lab, Cyber Challenge Lab, which is a systematic way of seeing how we can co-innovate. And it's focusing also on this part of matchmaking, who needs to know whom in order to create collaborations. And we work from challenges where there is one demand side that comes with, this is my problem, for example, I need to fix this, help me. But also something that is important when we developed this kind of strategy was that it needs to be, at least at the early stages, very, very sandbox. Like it needs to be free of any kind of stress about selling or buying solutions. We're talking only about co-innovating, sprinting. And how we work with that, we see it as 3 steps or stages, and you either could be in one stage or the second stage. It's not a linear process. Even if you see it here as a linear, you could start with stage 2, or we can start with stage 1 and stay there, or you can go directly to stage 3, and I'll explain them a little bit. But you could sit in stage 1 in years and years as well. But something that is interesting here on topic of, this is a lot of academia here, we are actually doing research together with the universities on this methodology, so to speak, because I wouldn't say it's a process, it's more of a methodology or a framework. So we're collaborating both with NTNU and Karlstad University in framing it, making it more accessible and scalable. So here we have already in the development cross-sectoral cooperation inside the project. So a little bit about how it works. The stage 1, it's like exploration. This one, challenge definition. Here we're working only with the, in this case, it's public sector often, like the challenge provider, the demand side, who has the problem, what they need to fix. But usually, especially if you have a big organization, no matter if it's a corporate or if it's a public sector, you might have a lot of challenges, but you need help in being more concrete which of those you want to address and how you want to address them. So what we do is we meet with the challenge provider, we talk about how the process could go, what are the possible ways, and then we create a workshop with them. We've called it Needs Workshop. It's around 2.5 hours. We gather, we talk about the problem, what possible solution, what possible next steps. And we help them concretize, but not too much what the problem is. So still have a little bit of an open idea, because we don't need to have the solution now, but we need to have an idea of what the problem is that could be solved. And then we have created, again, together with the university, a template. It's like a steps helping the public sector or the big corporation decide on what exactly they need to answer in order also internally to prioritize. The second stage, this is when we recruit. We go out in our networks and we get more and more academic partners, startups, big companies who want to attack the challenge. And then we go together and create a workshop. And after that, we have a follow-up and we give like kind of a matrix for the people who are responsible for the challenge, for the public sector, for example. And then we go on to evaluation, because more often than one, there is no solution that fits all. So we see that, okay, we have explored this challenge here. Now there are different ways. Either you have a solution, then you can go buy off the shelf. So then we say, okay, go buy off the shelf. You don't need to do anything more than that. Or maybe there are some risks you need to de-risk. Maybe it's time to do an innovation procurement or some kind of innovation procurement process. Go and do that. Or maybe you don't need to address this challenge at all, because this could also be a result of this second stage. It could happen that the thing you thought was so important was actually not so important. You can live with having this risk. You don't need to address it at all. Or maybe it's too big of a risk, or maybe you're not sure enough that you can do a procurement. Then maybe you need to go and ask our university partners to make a research project on it and go even deeper into the problem. So this is how we are working with attacking this collaboration. No, I will be pointing here, right? And who participates? Well, we have the public sector organizations. They provide the challenges, but they need agility. We have the startups. They provide solutions and creativity, but they need also idea and market validation. They need to know if their idea is going to work. So this is why they are attending that kind of collaborations, or maybe getting new ideas. And then we have the researchers who have the expert knowledge and the infrastructure. But I dare say again, Leonardo, you need the real world application of research. This is a good way of doing it. And of course, possible other participants. About those people I mentioned, we have the experts, but are they staying here? If there's some kind of ethical hacking CTF like challenges you mentioned also, Leonardo, today, that it's what it's making people stay, what is making them interested, and also what can bring them to their future employers. And we've done some of those together as well. And just I'll go short through this slide. We call our process, one of our processes we work with, 90% innovation, 10% procurement. What we mean here is that we do not focus on the procurement part, we focus on the innovation part. And the current case we're working on, it's with Karlstad municipality, where it's a case where of course, mobile phones at work? Do you take your own phone and use it to do work job, or do you use your work phone and use it to browse TikTok? So it could be, there's a lot of risks. So together with the Karlstad municipality, we're now going to do our first challenge lab with them in 21st of November. It's in Swedish because of course it's happening in Swedish. And we've done some workshops with them, coming to decide what the challenge will be and what we want for solution. And they filled this template and have given us very good, valuable feedback if the template is good or not. So another thing we're working about those startups, something that we created again across border together with Sweden and Norway, we created a cybersecurity accelerator. And how it works? Well, it's a 12-week program that guides startups. It gives them services, like personal services. It also includes pitch training. It also includes a lot of tools and networks. But what I think here is very interesting is not only that it's cross-border, which means that no matter what part of Sweden or Norway you are, you can apply. It's a joint program. But what we try to do here is that we place the program in the other accelerator that already existed, so that we try to diversify this accelerator's portfolio as well. In this way, they will be able to take care of this accelerator. And here we have even very good collaborations with universities about researchers, with entrepreneurs, in order to be more ideas generating from the universities. And I would like to end up in today's AI-generated PowerPoint presentations. I wanted to end up with some of pictures of the amazing people, and there's just a fraction of them that have been working and making all this possible. And as Leonardo mentioned, we have NordSec coming. We have Security Divas, which is also a very good way of it's a very successful, very successful women-only conference in Norway that we decided now we take the lead and do it in Sweden. And those down are the things you mentioned as well, Leonardo. Those are the hackers, yeah. And when we went and talked with students, or like we're talking about high schoolers, we also tried to push for them being interested already early. Here you see some students are presenting chaos courses. So what I want to say is that it's all about the people, even if it's cyber. So thank you. And it is a safe QR code. Don't worry. It just leads to my LinkedIn, because sometimes LinkedIn is easier. So thank you.
We'll take 2 minutes break because we had to transfer the PowerPoint to the mainframe. Todd and I, 20 minutes, and then we say like 5 to 10 minutes for other questions. First of all, Todd and I have been working together for maybe 15 years now, about 15 years, in this area of border security. It's quite interesting because Neshe's presentation is about cross-border networking and security in the private sector mostly, but also the public sector. And the work that we do with Todd is really about studying cross-border management and the security, the management of security looked at many different cases of cross-border public sector management, if you want. But we come to the same conclusion, is that we are in this era where we actually have to increase the cooperation. And that's something that I want to detail a bit more now. So which one do I use? This up and down, and then 2 point. Is this one maybe? Okay, yeah, it's working. Do I have to activate this on the side here? Yeah, you move it, yeah. So what I want to show here is that we have a number of books that have been published. The one which has my name on, the first one is now old, is 2005. One of the things that came out of that study was that basically in the conclusion, we say states have to cooperate better. That's all. And it's quite interesting because, you know, you look at the time lag, right? One of the things that we realized is that state policies were built inward. They have a state-centered perspective and they never cross the border. But in the world in which we work, and that's the work that Patterns in Border Security is basically an overview of how states work across borders across the world. So we look at all 5 different regions of the world, right? We look at Australasia, Africa, Latin America, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that that book shows is that there are a number of continents like Southeast Asia, India and its partners, that have absolutely no relationships across borders, to the point that they have difficulties of trading with each other, right? So for instance, India trades very, very little with its immediate border partners. The relationship that is the best developed is with China. And you know that in some parts of the boundaries that India and China have, actually there is also a state of war, right? There's 100,000 military personnel between China and India on the Indian side. It's not a joke. It's very, very serious. And then the last book is even more detailed because we look at the Canada-US relationship. Todd and Christian Lepreche together have edited that book, where we look at basically the different regions that divide Canada and the US. We look at the Cascadia region, which is on the Pacific coast, and we move across the country all the way to the Atlantic and then on the Arctic. So we look at how all of these different regions work. And one of the things that we discover there, which is really, I think, very, very interesting, is that there are different patterns of cooperation, collaboration, coordination, and basically management of the relationship. And one of the things that I find the most fascinating is related to what Neshe was talking about, is that the industries that trade have to be taken into account because they have a huge impact on the kind of cross-border management that is necessary for the good security of the cross-border region. To illustrate this, you do not operationalize security in a region that trades, let's say, wheat or cattle, the same way that you do this when you trade in cars. or the same way that you do this when you're trading human intelligence, for instance, right? Or software development, like in the Cascadia region, which is the region of Vancouver, Seattle, you have, you know, all these corporations that work across the border, and obviously the movie industry, cybersecurity, and obviously all of this really differs quite greatly. So to move on, one of the things that we have in a way done across these different writing and these different research projects is that we've been able to show that there is an evolution in the way security should be operationalized across these border regions. Today, we work on airports, seaports, indigenous communities, and global security transformation. So we are touching on cybersecurity issues. We could expand our partnership after what I heard, obviously here, we should think about it. But one of the things that we've also discovered is that the scales at which we are partnering in two regions that share one boundary line between Norway and Sweden, for instance. And the way you partner across an international airport and the main other airports of the world with which that airport trades. Think about this, you know, most of the trade, the airport that I've worked on, that I know best is the French airport out of Roissy, right? It gets most of its trade from the rest of Europe. It's quite interesting to see this. So the way you partner with the rest of Europe is not the same as the partnering with other airports across the world, right? So you need to every time adapt your management of border security. So we're getting there. Vancouver, for instance, as a seaport, trades mostly with Pacific Asia, Japan, China, and India. So the kind of border management and border security that you would implement would also vary greatly. We also use, and that's why I put it there, the border security management is an institute that we offer every summer in July. It's actually, that institute is offered the 4th week of July every summer. And Christian, Todd, and Jamie from Australia are basically the coordinator for that border institute. It's open worldwide. People can attend the institute. They just have to register. And we are targeting not students, undergraduate students, but we're targeting professionals who work in the public sector and are interested in border security management. It doesn't make you a border security expert, but it makes you a better management of border security issues that you may have at home, whether you work for a municipality or a region or a state agency, right? So that's the idea that so we can go to the next slide. So one of the issues here, and I go back to some of the literature, right? So the question that I'm addressing in the next few slides is, how did we generally understand issues of border security and partnering in the world in the 1950s versus today? And it's quite, and I start with John Locke because, you know, one of the things that is quite interesting is that we tend to cooperate, or we tend to work quite well when we speak the same language. And that has been one of the big assumptions from the 1950s onward, right? So for instance, security agencies, the spying agencies that have the best relations are the I5, and they all speak English, right? And yet, one of the counterintuitive contemporary issues is that the area of the world that has developed the most sophisticated, counterintuitive capacity to cooperate and collaborate is the European Union, where people speak at least 20 official languages. So how do we resolve this issue, right, of the post-Second World War view that you can only cooperate when you share the same language versus the fact that you have at least one example of an international organization that groups 27 states and plus now, obviously, because of the different forms that the European Union has taken, the different contracts and so on and so forth. across other states. For instance, Norway is a very interesting case, which is not a member, but yet is associated for almost all the policies and pays in and also receives some funding. It's like, how can you be a member and not be a member? Anyway, it's very interesting to see an exception like this. But so the idea here is to discuss this with you very briefly. So the issue is that theoretically, first of all, with Hobbes, it has to be written. So in other words, maybe it's a bureaucratic process, right? To speak very bluntly. Two, it has to do with trust and reciprocity. And Ostrom, who's a Nobel Prize winner and a woman, by the way, very interesting, came up with this idea of trust and reciprocity. In the trust and reciprocity idea that she develops, the most interesting one is the idea of reciprocity. Is that trust results from reciprocity. So we can go to this one. And here, I'm just going to go through this very quickly, but when we look at reciprocity, basically what we learn is that you have to build trust by reciprocity. You develop mechanisms so you show the other side or your main partner that you have the ability to protect their interests, not yours. And we can. So it's a dynamic relationship. It's a relationship that is continually in the building, and it's a relationship that continually evolves. It becomes, in a way, normative in the sense that, between two states, it has to be written. How do we do this concretely? One of the ways that I explain this to my students is the number of times, for instance, ministers meet in the EU. So just, counterintuitive, Canada is a federal confederate state. And the different provinces meet once a year when they meet. Sometimes they don't even meet once a year. But you know that ministers of industry meet in Brussels. Do you know how many times they meet? It's more than once a month anyway, right? It's about 18 times a year, which implies that they have continual bureaucracies and discussions ongoing almost on a daily basis inside the COREPER, that big nebulous organization that brings all the bureaucracies together in Brussels, right? So that trust and reciprocity is actually, in this example, you have, in a way, discontinued trust and reciprocity in Canada, but inside the European Union for economic and financial matters, for banking issues, you have actually an ongoing discussion between the ministerial bureaucracies that never ever stops. That's the reciprocity part. So obviously the trust then becomes a huge economies of scales, and it allows for these partners to rely on each other much more. And they write it, it becomes contractual, and they build up obviously this over time. So for our research, we operationalize this way. We basically assume that it starts with coordination. Coordination is when two partners basically share information. You don't share a bureaucracy. You don't have, you just meet from time to time and you share information. But the next stage then is cooperation, is when one side will, for instance, start working on behalf of the other side across the border. And, one of the very basic way to understand this is when you patrol a boundary line. Canada and the US in Cascadia in the 1990s would patrol the boundary line at the same time, both sides. And then they would not have shared schedules. So, on the US side and on the Canada side, there were always gaps when the border was not patrolled. And obviously, drug agencies, the ones who want to move goods across, guns and migrants and so on and so forth, would use these times. But so they cooperate, and when they start cooperating, they basically shared the periods of time when one side would go and then the other side would go. So basically each side would patrol at different times, and they start to cooperate that way. That's just one example, right? But they are able, as a result of this, to work much better. And what I'm describing here is only one function. But once you multiply this by 100 different activities, you can move from cooperation to collaboration. The collaboration stage, though, is even a bit more ambitious. It's that maybe at one point, only one side will actually patrol the border. They basically take the full responsibility for the partnership. So, you know, one of the examples that I use for my own students is to say, well, maybe one agency takes a whole function on behalf of both partners. You know, they take care of a whole policy area and they say, we'll take care of this, we'll be accountable to you. And now we are patrolling the border and you don't have to spend any money on this. There are things that you do much better. For instance, you do arrest much better than us. So now you will specialize on arresting people, but we'll patrol the border on the US side or the reverse, right? So what we see here is that there is, in a way, progression from coordination where we only exchange information to collaboration when one side becomes, in a way, responsible for the other side, pays for the expense and does it. Go to the next slide. So you see that one of the issues here is to overextend basically each country's own policy objective, is to work together on these policy goals, right? And is to be able to share not just information, but to share what the countries want to do. It implies issues that have to do with shared values, which I think in the case of the European Union, at least legally, because of Constitution, Charter of Rights, and so on and so forth, works really well. Between Canada and the US, it's a bit more complex. And in many cases across the world, it's very complex. We can step to the next one. What we discover here is that these issues obviously frame the way we collect the information, but also the way we deal with them. And what we discover, right, is the partnership is not that simple. What happens then when, you know, issues of bordering are moving away from the boundary line, for instance, inside airports and seaports, but also outside of the country? You want to partner with airports that are thousands of miles away. Can these regulatory partnership environment can also take into account, you know, basically multi-site partnerships across the world? I'll give you an example. The airport of Toronto trades with about 50 places across the world. They've started to move officers, Canadian officers, across the world. In the EU, for instance, there is a very good partnership in Amsterdam, Brussels, with Canadian officials who are working with EU officials in these different places, like in customs or in migration, right? So these regulatory environment, this progression from coordination to cooperation to collaboration can also move away from the single boundary line. That's what I talked about earlier, the scaling issue, right? The border moving that way makes the whole dimension and all this reflection very difficult. And this is kind of what we're working on now. And then the last slide. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to Todd, and Todd will basically explain to you and go in much more detail about some work that he's done. So Todd has had a quite interesting career. He is a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He basically has done lots of intelligence work. He's been on the ground. He's also at one point was responsible for a whole region of Canada-US relationship on the ground. And he's also got a PhD and become a professor at 2 different universities and published a lot of work on these issues. So Todd, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As Emmanuel said, my name is Todd Hatley. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me today to have opportunity to present. One of the problems with going last, there's 2 problems with going last. You don't have any time left, but all the important stuff has been said already, so I don't know how much I can add to this discussion. The first 2 presenters, I really want to thank you for what you presented, because I think it's really, this is where the world's going. As someone who has gone back to working in policing as well as being as a professor, I can tell you that most criminal offenses now include a cyber component. And if we want to train our police officers for the future, they've got to understand the cyber aspect of stuff, whether it's, you know, something as simple as hiding a debt list or something, or child pornography, or moving money, crypto across the world. It's getting increasingly complex. So as Emmanuel said, I'm a retired police officer, federal police officer. I work border integrity, drugs, weapons, human trafficking, national security, that sort of stuff. I left 6 years ago, went back to academia, and last year I returned to policing. I'm now an intelligence analyst working on organized crime intelligence. Next slide. So Emmanuel talked about this book, Patterns in Border Security, the coordination, cooperation, collaboration piece. I won't take your time because coffee starts in 5 minutes. So we'll go to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about where we go from here as opposed to what we found. I'll mention a little bit about what we saw in our research, and it's mostly going to refer to this piece, Security, Cooperation, and Governance, which is a case study of the Canada-US border. Oh, I got to advance my slide so I know what I'm saying too. That's the problem here. So what I want to talk about says, like it says, what did we learn about this, and what did we learn about building resilient borders? My background is security, so a lot of this is going to refer to security and the resilience on the security piece. I think COVID-19, and it wasn't just COVID-19, there was other challenges before COVID-19 to borders and how well our borders worked and how well they sprung back to being like they were before. But COVID-19 really raised questions about how resilient are our borders and how well do they work. Next slide. So let me just answer the question, what do we think of as a resilient border? When I first started studying borders, we were told to think of them as, you know, social practices and discourse. This was Nancy Passey's thing, that we have to think about borders as being these, you know, constructed realities of discourses and social practices. But as I matured and thought more about it, borders are much more than that. And one of the things that we learned in this last research project in the Canada-US border is borders are also really about relationships. And relationships, and I'm going to go back and harping on this because relationships really matter. We have to talk about interactions, whether interactions are positive or negative. And I don't want to disagree with Emmanuel, but I think Pakistan and India do have relationships. It's just negative. They don't, they exchange, their relationship is exchanging artillery shells every once in a while. You know, but they do work on, you know, having, opening the border once in a while to allow people to cross, to visit family and that sort of stuff also. So when we think about resilient borders, we want to think about how well do these processes at borders, whether that's security processes, trade processes, cultural movement, hockey teams, whatever it may be crossing borders, how well do these processes respond to stress? When we had COVID, we shut our border down, yet we still allowed the trucks to move and move trade. So, and once COVID ended, our border went back to relatively normal in the Canada-US case. What parts of the border are affected by stress and how quickly do they return to normal? Next slide. So what did we learn from our Canada-US study? You go ahead and press it again. One of the things we learned is that borders are not homogeneous, they're very heterogeneous. In this sense, I compare it to a quilt in the sense that along the border, we have different things happening all along the border. And what happens in Cascadia, where Emmanuel lives, is very different than what happens in the prairies, which is different than in Ontario, where I live. In Ontario, where I live, it's all industrial goods crossing the border. In Saskatchewan, where I grew up, it was agricultural goods crossing the border. We had veterinarians checking cattle to make sure they could cross the border to go to the slaughterhouses in the United States. You don't get that in Ontario, where it's industrial goods moving back and forth constantly. So what happens is the border, and I compare it to a quilt. It's, you know, we get a whole blanket that's going to keep us warm, but it's different pieces, different patchworks along the border that all have different functions. And those all matter. The individual relationships at that state really matter. Next, please. They operate on a different level. So when I talk about this quilt or patchwork piece, that local is really important, but it's covered over by an institutional relationship. The institutional relationship is what the government set up. Governments have institutional agreements on how cross-border is going to work. Yet at the local level, we have different agreements on how it works. And oftentimes that local level functions very differently than what the institutional agreements say they should be. Go ahead, next one. Relationships matters at all levels, but certainly I think they probably matter more so at the local level. One of the, I was in Finland a couple of weeks ago, and well, before I tell you that story, I'll tell you this story. When I first started working border integrity as a police officer, my boss said, we had meetings every week across the border with our American counterparts, Drug Enforcement Agency, U.S. Border Patrol, these certain agencies. And my boss first said to me, he said, "You're going to go across that meeting every week until you know everybody at the table and can talk to them face to face." I thought, what a waste of time. I should be doing my police officer work stuff. But no, he was absolutely right. I found out after a little while that those relationships were really important. The fact that I could pick up the phone and talk to that person on the other side of the border and get the information and share information made all the difference in the world to how well I did my job or didn't do my job. Last week, I was in, follow up with this story, 2 weeks ago, I was in Finland, and I was having a discussion with the, he would have been the senior officer along the Finnish-Russian border. And he was telling me that they tried to do the same thing with their Russian counterparts. He got to know his Russian counterpart. He even had dinner at his house. But within 2 years, his Russian counterpart had moved on. There was an intentional effort on the part of the Russians not to build relationships so that it didn't become established. So I think this idea of relationships is really, really important. Let's go to the next slide. The interrelated nature of levels of operation. This is kind of the chicken and the egg question. What comes first, that local relationship or that institutional relationship, and which one's more important? And I think that when I think about that question, and I've thought about it a lot lately, I think it doesn't matter. If I look at the Canada-US case, what came first was the local relationship. We have an organization, a cross-border policing organization in Canada called ShipRider, is the acronym for it, Integrated Cross-Border Marine Law Enforcement Operations, something like that. They first started in 1999 as a local relationship between British Columbia Police and Washington State Police to combat cross-border drug flows. It went from a local relationship to being something that became institutionalized and rebuilt and built then across the entire border. So which one comes first? I don't know. But what is important, next slide, go ahead. Just hit it 3 times and I'll go backwards. Hit it three times. Just hit the thing, advance it 3 times, please. 2, 3. So what does matter is if number 2, right here is this, the idea that this institutional and local relationships support each other. We can establish local relationships, we can establish institutional relationships, but they have to have a two-way connection to support one another, top down and bottom up. But importantly, in terms of resilience, I think what this creates is this redundancy in the border that we have a top-down supporting certain programs, but we also have a bottom-up supporting the same programs. So we think in Canada, when we think about security, we think about the election of Mr. Trump coming to office and how it's going to impact our security along the border. I'm hopeful because what happens at the top may change the relationship between our political leadership and those people who drive the institutions, but I doubt it very much is going to impact what happens at the lower level. That local relationships will continue even if the top relationships are bad. So it builds in this redundancy that I think is really, really important. Again, I'll go back to the first point. Relationships really actually matter, probably more so than we actually know. There's this anthropological thing about the whole thing. So moving forward with the research, and I'm already into your coffee break, I apologize. Manuel talked about trust, and I think this concept of trust is vitally important. But I also think we have to understand it at different levels. That trust is not a single player, not a single level game. There's an institutional level of trust, but there's also a stakeholder level of trust. And that stakeholder level of trust is something that we have to take the time to understand to see how it feeds back up into the institutional level. And I don't think we have much of a grasp on that yet. And that's very important. The idea of reciprocity and how we establish reciprocity at the lower level is really significant. The second piece is the role of industry, indigenous groups, cultural groups. And when I talk about indigenous groups, I really want to say people often use the term subnational groups, but I see indigenous groups as national groups, as sovereign players. So I think the best term for me is non-Westphalian states. Because they're actually, in my mind, sovereign nations. So what's the role of these organizations? How do we build trust with these groups? And what's their role in cross-border security, also in the resilience of the border? When we think about Amazon, for example, and the role that Amazon plays in cross-border security and the shipping of hundreds of thousands of packages every single day, and I know for a fact that most of the drugs we move out of Canada move in small packages, and most of them coming here to Europe lately. You know, that's a role is being played by Amazon, the DHLs of the world, and those groups, not by government actors at all. So we have to start thinking about those sorts of things also. I think I took more than 10 minutes, and I apologize for that. I think, do we have time for a few questions? Maybe, do we have time for a few questions? 10 minutes? Okay, so we'll take a few questions there. I apologize for going quickly through this all, but that's the way it goes.
I assume nowadays the challenge is related to the Mexican-US border rather than Canada-US border. What are the from your perspective, and the world it's really a solution as we saw on TV?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking me what are the challenges along the US-Mexican border? Is that correct? I worked along the US-Mexican border for a while, so I have a bit of an understanding. I think there's a couple of things that come out along the US-Mexican, well, a number of things that come out along the US-Mexican border. One of it is sheer volume. The volume of goods being moved across that border, you just can't inspect everything. I remember being there one time, and there was a 50-foot, so what's that, 15-meter cargo trailer full of avocados. And it was being unloaded pallet by pallet to check for drugs. It takes somebody an entire day to unload a trailer, and the manpower or human power to do that sort of thing is massive. So sheer volume is one thing. The capacity to, if you're a bad guy and you really want to get away with your crime, fit in and look normal. So I always said that if I was a drug smuggler, what I want is a customs cleared trucking company, so that when I load my dope onto a truck full of broccoli and move it across the border, I'm already cleared to pass through. So this buy-in into what's normal or what's legitimate. And of course, the other thing is they build these things like called walls, which my finding is they're only as good as the tallest ladder. You know, I've seen people go over walls, go under walls, go through walls. It's all political in that sense. And from a security perspective, it makes no sense whatsoever. The challenge, but I mean, there's also a relationship to Canada, the Mexico to Canada US relationships, in the sense that for the longest time we didn't have visas for Mexicans to travel to Canada. Canada was a destination point to sneak into the United States. Now and we had at one point where there's over 15,000 people crossing the border a year to get into the United States from Canada. That's changed in the last year, and they've got that better under control now. So, but the challenges are, you know, there's a market in the United States. Borders create differential marketplaces. And when you got these differential marketplaces, whether it's for drugs to come into the United States or weapons to go into Mexico, borders have a role in creating those marketplaces, and that's a challenge for any criminal organization.
Maybe this question is both for you and Neshi as well. I was wondering, what is the national component in cybersecurity? Like, how much going across the border really makes a cybersecurity less safe, less secure? I'm thinking also, I'm working on the B Solutions project, and we have, I mean, so we see borders as an obstacle in many realities, but how much is really crossing the border the actual threat to that? Thank you.
Still need this.
If I understood the question correctly, I mean how much crossing the border is a problem about cybersecurity. The physical crossing, if you mean, yeah, and I would say what we have seen, and I suppose you can attest to that, is that it is not a problem, specifically not in European context. And as you mentioned, Norway is part of it, even if they're not part of it. So I would say it's not a problem in neither in legal way, not in. I mean, now when you cross the border, when we're talking about the physical way, it's not like what he's, not his reality, but you won't see any checkpoints. You won't be stopped. Once, I can tell you a very funny story. My GPS led me through some woods and etc. And I was like, oh, now I will never be able to go to the airport. And actually, no one stopped me. I went through the woods, through some small roads, and suddenly I was in Norway. So the physical, no, not even, I would say, specifically given the collaborations and the European legislation. That's my take on it.
I have a different take on it, and I'll give you two stories. And again, I'm sorry. The first one is in Canada, of course, your information is private and protected. I'm sure it's much the same way in Europe, except at border crossings. When you arrive at the Canada-United States border crossing, the threshold for privacy is almost nothing. So if the Border Patrol officer wants to seize your computer or seize your phone and look at it, they can do so without having to have a warrant or any reasonable cause to suspect or anything else. They can just take it. You have to give them your password. If you don't, you get to go to jail and stay there until you do give up your password. And they're basically looking for things like child pornography and those sorts of things coming into the country. So there's that piece of it, that your privacy part at the border. I presently work on Asian organized crime and money laundering. That's my shtick right now with the police service I work for. For us, it's a significant issue from two perspectives. First, whatever happens behind the cyber curtain, and we find our guys dealing a lot in what's called USDT, and those people in cyber probably know what that is. Dollar for dollar cryptocurrency, basically. What happens behind that cyber wall, we don't know. If there's a trade that goes on in property, in illegal goods, whatever it is, we have no idea what happens. It's gone and not available to us. But the other piece is, because I work with the area I work in, we see a lot of money flowing across borders through cyber currency, moving across borders back to mainland China, and then back again towards Canada. And it's funding different activities, including political interference, which is one that we've just kind of stumbled across in the last little while. When I first started my job, my boss said, let's follow the money. It'll eventually lead us to political corruption. And lo and behold, it has. So I think that's the other piece of the cyber currency one that really concerns us right now, is the money.
Thank you so much, Todd, Emmanuel. I very much enjoyed it, and very compelling arguments, but I think there are a number of what ifs in here, in the sense that many of the challenges that we are dealing with these days, they tend to change rather rapidly, both in space and in time, right? And when I listen to you, Emmanuel, especially the points on trust, I found crucial. Where I come from Finland, by the way, that was basically all that we had for last 3 decades, and now it's gone. So everything went with that. And I guess the question really is that how much we can really, I mean, your account is really much based on the US Canadian case, and you explained the context well, in the language, for example, and even though there are differences, there are very strong uniting factors as well. And I find that some of those concepts or the ideas, they don't really apply in the world that we are living in, especially at the external borders right now. Maybe due to the fact that, like Todd said, borders are very heterogeneous. You know, it's really difficult to find one way or a solution that would fit all of it. And trying to come to the question is in here, like what it is that we can, or where can we take this from the border studies perspective? That like what would be the, like what I would take from your talk is that you have these different pillars that if one fails, the other ones kick in. But what do we do in a situation where all the pillars fail at the same time?
I don't know if you can answer that, but that's what we are debating and where I come from at the moment. Yeah. No, you go for it. I'm talking.
I mean, I don't know the Finnish case, Finnish-Russian case really, really well, but I would think from what's been described to me from people I've talked to is that you never had reciprocity. And that reciprocity is a fundamental function of building trust. You had one actor who was Finns who were acting in good faith, another who wasn't. So what you end up with in the end is a collapse of the institutions and the local relationships. And I would say that what you're facing now is the potential for a rebordering, going through the bordering process over again. And when we talk, I think I mentioned this before, that the model of cooperation, collaboration, coordination, however it goes, I wanted to add another C to that beginning, which was conflict. What do we see at borders in conflict? But in the discussion with you and another colleague, I think I changed my mind and said what we're seeing is the bordering process. We're not seeing actual borders, but the borders in the process of being built. And I think that's what we're witnessing now, and certainly in the Ukrainian-Russian region.
Maybe we close the panel with this and go for coffee. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hallå? Hörs det? Ja, den står ju lägre förresten den, ja. Det är därför. Den står väl på ett den, va? Hallå? Så står den andra, tror jag, va? På 3, va? Originalmicken står väl på 3, va? Ja, det är den. Nu står de samma. Då borde det vara samma. Nu ska vi se om man funkar tom då. Nu kör vi till streamen. Hallå?
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are running a little late as usual. Yeah, we're running a little late. We don't want to eat into your lunch, but we try to maybe catch up a little time. Just before checking, is Samuel Okunada, the three presentations are here? Yeah, well, you may come, but you could also stay here. Lyudmila Progonyuk, yeah, and Irina Yaremak. Yeah, so that's the three paper presentation. But before I'll give the floor to Peter Hillengren. I'm Martin van der Velde from the Radboud University, and my suggestion maybe to Martin is shift the cross-border school to 3 days and the annual meeting to 1 day. Then we have enough time. So it's so well, very interesting. Well, I'm not going to give a full introduction. I think you can do it yourself. The first presentation is by Peter Hillengren from the Psychological Defense Agency in Sweden. I think that's a very important topic. It is about technology, hard technology, but it's also how it is perceived. So I guess that's something that you are going to address. You have about half an hour. I will notice 5 minutes or so. And then we have the three papers, 15 minutes or so, but it's also, I'll keep track of that as well. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Hi, my name is Peter Hillengren. I'm from the Swedish Psychological Defense Agency. Really happy to be here. Grateful to be part of this program, and also glad to see that we have 2 Ukrainians here today. I'm going to be really excited to listen to your presentations later. Thank you. I will give a short overview of our agency and the work that we do. I'm going to bore you with some history, and then I'm going to try to jump into some current events, the narratives that we see, and also speak a little bit about the upcoming US elections, and also a bit about artificial intelligence. But what you see here is kind of our agency has instruction from the Swedish government, and we try to do this by analyzing and identifying foreign malign information and interference, and we try to analyze that, and we do weekly reports to the Swedish government, and in cases other actors need to be informed, we do that as well. But as I will come back to a couple of times, we are not Sweden's psychological defense. We are an agency, but it is the capability of all the population that is Sweden's psychological defense. So, no, I think we have to change. So basically, what is psychological defense? It is the collective ability of society to resist foreign malign influence activities and other kinds of disinformation that is directed, in this case, at Sweden. And we believe that our resilience will prevent or diminish the effects that threat actors try to influence our decisions, our perceptions, and perhaps also our behaviors. Yeah. And this is a quote that I think you have seen a couple of times. A lie told often enough becomes the truth. You can take the next slide. And this is something that we often attribute to Joseph Goebbels, from a Nazi from the Second World War. But in fact, Goebbels was not the first one who said this. You can take the next slide. This was actually said a couple of decades earlier, also by Lenin, who were saying basically the same thing. But in fact, Lenin wasn't either the first. You can take the next. the first one who actually said something like this was a British novelist called Isa Blagden in the 1850s. And why this matter, I will come back to a bit later on when we talk about the narratives. You can take the next slide. I think this is, before I get into the real presentation, I will bring up this. It's interesting. There are 4 John Wick movies, and I think a couple of you have seen at least one of them. And it is interesting in a couple of ways, because in those 4 movies, Keanu Reeves kills 439 people. And that is pretty high even by Hollywood standards. And the interesting thing is not that he kills this many people. You can take the next slide. It is that even though he kills 439 people in 4 movies, we all still feel sympathy for him. And why do we do that? Because they killed his dog. And that is kind of an illustration of the to cognitive warfare and information influence campaigns. If you can influence your audience, if you go really into the neuroscience here, influence your audience amygdala, that's kind of the bullseye campaigns. Yeah, we can take the next slide. Now I'm going to bore you with some history, because psychological defense is in Sweden, it's a concept that goes back to World War II. And as you can see in this from this newspaper from 1941, it was a Swedish researcher who toured Sweden with a message that psychological defense is just as important as an air force. This is one of the earliest illustrations that you can find about psychological defense as a concept in Sweden. You can take the next slide. And then I would say that the first wake-up call for Sweden was the Soviet Union coup in Prague in 1948. That was hybrid warfare at the time. And the Swedish prime minister at that time was a man called Tage Erlander, and he was seriously concerned about what was going on and thought that something like that might even happen in Sweden. So the Swedish response was to launch a commission on psychological defense. And their final product recommended creating an agency for psychological defense. And this was in the beginning of the 90s. Quite a long tradition here. You can take the next slide. And our wake-up call was the invasion and illegal annexation of Crimea. First time since the Second World War that hybrid warfare, deception, and information influence shifted. It's led to and India was launched January the 1st in 2022. And that is the current agency. You can take the next slide. We have a couple of different research priorities that we try to, we don't do any. One of those areas that we absolutely need more knowledge about. You can take the next slide. And with 2.5 can look it can be illustrated in many different highlighted in a very positive way from Ukraine after the full-scale Russian invasion. What the will to fight actually mean for a country. So that has created a big interest for us in the will to fight. So this is important because Ukraine is the, if you say that what will to fight means for a country, you can take another slide. Because will to fight can also look like this. And this is just a couple of years ago. And this was from Afghanistan, where that nation collapsed like a house of cards in just days. Because nobody was willing to fight for their country, basically. So it is a very important concept, but we still know far too little about it at this point. You can take the next slide. In Sweden, we have measured our willingness to fight actually since 1952. And as all you know, it's quite rare to have that kind of long-term statistical data, no matter what issue you're looking into. So it's been quite stable in Sweden since the 1950s. You can see that it's going up a bit after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in the last couple of years. But this question is, it's not a very personal question, is it? It's more based on if you think that Sweden should put up resistance. It doesn't say much if you yourself, what you yourself are willing to do. So we are trying to combine this with new measurements and also behavioral indicators. So this is just one example of the measurements that we have. Gallup International came out with a similar study in March this year, where a number of countries were included. And as you can see, Ukraine have a pretty high number. And they also have a distinctively low number for people who don't know. I think that's quite natural. We'll transfer into information influence campaigns and the narratives and some of the current themes that we see. First, we define it as coordinated activities by a foreign entity that includes misleading or false information that is aimed at influencing our decisions, our opinions, and also our behaviors, threatening Sweden and our Swedish interests. You can take the next slide. So one of the ways to organize basically what you're looking at is to look at it from different major narratives. And when it comes to narratives, I would say that purpose and sender determine whether something is part of free information formation, free opinion formation in a liberal democracy, or foreign information manipulation and interference. Because we don't look at what's going on within our own borders. We only look at what's coming towards our country from abroad. So if exactly the same message is said in Sweden, we treat it as part of the the national debate that is part of a free liberal democracy. But if it's a coordinated effort by foreign actors, then we will look at it and we will analyze it and perhaps also attribute it or have some countermeasures. You can take the next slide. But one of the main narratives on this matter is the constructive narrative, basically trying to claim that the threat actor is better. It is better than us. We have a better military. We have a better vaccine against COVID-19, for instance. But I would say that in general, this was more common during the Cold War, when it was more important for the Soviet Union and countries in the communist bloc to let the world know how fantastic countries they were. That is not a very constructive selling point for Russia today, to try to convince us that Russia is a fantastic country. They use other narratives, but this is still one of the main narratives, and perhaps also more commonly used by a country like China, for instance. You can take the next narrative. Another is one, try Sweden or Canada or UK or any Western country as a society in decay. And that is either by claiming that our politicians are incompetent, or that we have lost our moral compass, that we have lost our values. We don't believe in God anymore. We have LGBTQ rights and so on. And this is something that is commonly spread in their information warfare. You can take the next slide. And this is a bit of a classic. This is from Russian social media accounts trying to mock and make fun of the Swedish military that is yearly taking part in the Stockholm Pride Parade, and thereby trying to paint a picture of a Sweden that has fallen apart and has lost its values. And take the next slide. But this, I would say that commonly used today, avoidance and trying to shift focus. And it could be done in so many different ways. And if we take, for instance, Russia as an actor here, they can fuel both sides in a debate. For instance, you can have the same source, the same Russian source, claiming that Sweden is a deeply Islamophobic country and almost unbearable to live in for Muslims, saying that to one group, but to another group saying that Sweden has folded over for Islam and is soon to be completely Islamized. So you can actually have one actor saying two completely different things to different groups, because in the end, it's not the message itself that is the point. The point is the effect, and the effect is to create as much chaos and polarization as possible. So I would say that in general, the Russians don't want us to believe. They want us to disbelieve, that we should not know what is the truth, that they send out so many different versions of what has happened that people in the end kind of, I don't know what's true. I mean, regarding the Russian downing of the airplane MH17 a number of years ago, Russia has actually made over 500 regarding this, regarding the shoot down of that plane. So that is a much more common narrative in today's world, trying to shift focus and in the end trying to make us not really know what's true, and at the very end even questioning democracy itself. Yeah. So I will go a little bit into the types of threat actors that we see and monitor, and we are open about who those are. You can take next slide. The first one is Russia, and the Russian ecosystem for disinformation has 5 pillars. It is the official government information. That is when you see Maria Zakharova, Dmitry Peskov on TV. Then you have the state-funded TV. You have the proxies, the useful idiots. You of course have the social media and also disinformation. And yeah, we can change. And this is a quite complex infrastructure that Russia's disinformation and propaganda ecosystem. It has evolved over many years, so it's become quite complex these days. And take the next slide. Take the next slide. Oh, I think you have to click a couple of times there. Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, and this is an example from Russian TV, a military analyst close to the Kremlin who speaks at length about how an invasion of the Baltic countries could look like on Russian national television. And this was in December 2021. And as you can see here also, the circle in the ocean there, that is the Swedish island of Gotland, which in this scenario would have been taken over quite fast by the Russian military. So in a way, this is also a kind of psychological warfare, letting us know that this is an option on the table, you could say. You could take the next slide. And this is something that was on the streets of Moscow in May 2022. And well, I'm actually wrong when I say it was on the streets of Moscow. It was outside the Swedish embassy. And a commercial, you could say, that tried to highlight that some famous Swedes were Nazis, and the poster says that we are against Nazism, they are not, and it's Ingmar Bergman and Astrid Lindgren, for instance. Can take the next slide. Sorry. Yeah, Astrid Lindgren is a famous Swedish author who wrote Pippi Longstockings, as you will see here. Yeah, you can take this slide. And Ingmar Bergman is, yeah, exactly. And this was in St. Petersburg, and this was, of course, directed towards the Swedish and Finnish application for NATO. It was Pippi Longstockings and the Moomin Dad as marionettes controlled by Uncle Sam. So this was on the streets in St. Petersburg at the time, and you can also take the next slide. It's another example. And this was from November last year in Moscow, and this was more commonly seen in Moscow. And here we have the names and the faces of Swedes who had volunteered to fight in Ukraine and had died in Ukraine. They were portrayed here as Nazis, together with former Swedish kings and other people that they had problems with. Yeah, take the next slide. And this is an example from almost a year ago in Paris, when you had Stars of David sprayed around the city of Paris. And this was quite a rare case, actually, because the French security services attributed this to FSB, that is Russian security. Of course, FSB weren't there personally through a couple of steps down, where you actually had some in the end, some Moldovans doing the dirty work. But this is just one way to create a lot of attention by very small means. Can take the next slide. So if we look at the upcoming US, I'm soon finished. The upcoming US election, we try to monitor that from the agency, and we see that there are some current Russian priorities. It is the most important one is to weaken US and Americans in general support for Ukraine and for NATO. The second priority is to question the legitimacy of the election itself. And the third priority is to create polarization related to immigration. And some of the modus that is being used by Russian actors is what we call washed news. That is when fake news are spread and regarded as true. They are created by threat actors, but then they are picked up by legitimate media and thereby regarded as true. And of course, also the use of cyber attacks and paying influencers during the election campaign has been highlighted according to U.S. authorities. Yeah. I think I will skip a couple of slides since my time is running out, and I will say a few things about efficiently. We can take the next slide and the next, and we can actually take the next as well. When it comes to artificial intelligence, that is an upcoming, not just upcoming, it's already here influencing European elections. And this is quite an interesting example from the last election in Slovakia, when the pro-European candidate, as you can see here, he, just a couple of days before the election, a fake sound clip was leaked to the media with an AI version of his voice claiming that he would rig the election to win it, and he would also raise taxes on beer. So that's kind of hard to beat. And he had serious problems to confront this message, because this was during the last days before the elections, when there was supposed to be a pause from the candidates. They were not supposed to do any new campaign stops or have any new talking points during those last hours. And if this affected the election, it's of course quite hard to tell. But he lost, and the pro-Russian candidate won. Slovakia is now governed by a more pro-Russian government. And you can take the next slide. So just a few concluding remarks. We do not monitor domestic disinformation, only foreign. And our agency is not Sweden's psychological defense. We are a coordinating agency. And because it's as we see, it's the collective ability of society to resist and to have a media literacy and be critical of sources and so on. Yeah, you take the next slide. So that was my presentation. That went a bit too far, but we can live with it.
Well on time. So that leaves us room for 1 or 2 minutes, a few questions. Urgent questions. We can also take it to lunch, of course, and we have other moments maybe to talk.
Where do you draw the line between domestic? Do you have a map, a picture? You had a great picture of the network of Russian stuff, but do you also have a picture of the useful idiots that spread the shit, or do you say no, that's domestic, so we can't do that?
Yeah. You're correct on the last part. That is beyond our mandate. So we of course all know that there are connections within Sweden, but it's not something that we look at and follow and analyze because that's beyond our mandate. And it becomes easier to understand if you see that we are a defense agency. When it comes to what is going on with the agencies, we look at what's coming.
Only one short remark. So last weekend was the election in Moldovan Republic, and only less than 5% of the voters literally decided which side is the winning one. So thankfully, yeah, in the end was a European path for Moldovan Republic. Also, interesting study cases how the Russian interference was in that part of the Europe, despite of so many EU grants and so many EU investments and foreign investments. Yeah.
Exactly, and it became really, really close in Moldavia because the polls running into the election was, it seems to be a quite easy win for the pro-European side, but then in the end it was really, really close.
Really quick question. By my accent, you might be able to tell I'm from Northern Ireland. So I lived through an election in which there was foreign interference with the electorate. My constituency voted 98% to stay in the European Union. We were taken out of the European Union against our will. Do you think national governments need to do more to make people aware in the run-up to important referenda about that existence of that sort of interference? And that, I mean, how do we enable electorates to make educated judgments about what they are being fed in the run-up to votes? I mean, Moldavia, I was watching it going, this is like the Brexit referendum all over again. So we've some examples already.
Yeah, absolutely, because this is not running away. This is by all estimates going to continue and increase. And I think it actually goes down to teaching kids already in school to be have media literacy, to be critical of sources, because it's quite hard when you already are in your 40s or 50s. But one could always say one thing, and that is if a message triggers your emotions, that you become really mad or really happy or really angry with something, it could well be worth to not react instantly, but try to calm down and think someone who wants me to become mad, who is hitting the amygdala, and try to take it in a bit more cool manner. But for sure, I don't think we have the answer, but I think all European governments need to work with this issue, not least in elections.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next speaker. But for me, just one thing: shouldn't you work towards a Swedish offensive agency in that sense? But you don't have to answer. But what's the thin line between defense and offense? It is awareness, of course, in that sense. And for me, it's pretty scary, especially the AI. You can't. Some say that in 5 years, there's 90% that you don't know what's reality and what's not. So in that sense, we have to be aware, and in education, etc., make people aware. So maybe be a bit more offensive in that sense. We'll move on to a different continent. Samuel Okunade from Bowen University. Border Studies Circles, ABR, the ABS, and he's going to talk about addressing irregular migration in South Africa, para-diplomatic role of subnational governments in Limpopo province. Samuel, the floor is yours. 50 minutes.
Good morning, distinguished professors and colleagues. Let me start by saying thank you to the organizers of this event for inviting me to be a part of this, to present my work, and also to listen and learn from what happens in different parts of the world, as presented by participants here. Let me also say that I've not said this before, but I will say it today. In 2017, when I attended WSSA conference in the US, my utmost aim was to meet with somebody that I've read so much about, in the books. And I just knew that meeting with him is going to have a lot of impact on my work, and that's Emmanuel. So my major interest in 2017 was to meet with him and see how he can help shape my work. And I was glad I achieved that. So listening to you today, you've actually provided a better understanding on how issues that has to do with regional policies in Africa largely remains unimplemented on the continent, and I thank you for that. So I thank you for all you do to encourage early career scholars like myself. So the title of my presentation is Addressing Irregular Migration in South Africa, Para-Diplomatic Role of Subnational Government in Limpopo Province. Next slide. So this is the outline, but I will just try to speak to the work. The next slide. All right, so irregular migration largely remains a phenomenon in the Southern African development community, and that has attracted a lot of attention by scholars and different state and non-state actors. And looking into history, scholars have tried to provide an historical account on why this is the situation within the SADC region. And the one that stands out for me is the work by Francis Musoni in his book, border crossing and jumping in the Southern African region. The book actually provides a context or an understanding of why this is the situation. National entities that exist today, like South Africa and Zimbabwe, were once a homogeneous, socio-political space where people related with each other. They could move around each other unhindered. But with the emergence of these national entities, it became, and the demarcation of borders and all that, it became illegal to cross these borders. But in actual sense, to these people, these are not borders, and they don't see a reason why they shouldn't move, because for them, it's just a system being put in place to prevent them from moving freely between and amongst themselves. So you have a situation where the borders divide a people that were once a people. And it's not only peculiar to the Southern African region, you also find this in other regions of Africa and West Africa. And that forms part of the issues that we are being confronted with today. The next slide. So in addressing this, the South African government, because you have a huge number of irregular migrants crossing the borders between Zimbabwe and South Africa. So South Africa is actually at the receiving end. And so they've tried to put up different approaches to solve this issue. And one major approach which they've introduced is to fortify the borders by putting up a standing border guard and also to put up a wall. This project started a few years back, and what we can see from that today is that it has failed, because you discover that people still cross these borders whichever way they can. But the government, they've not learned their lessons, because they've actually moved on to, I think, the third phase of building these borders along the South African and Mozambican area. And that has not helped the situation. So the focus of this study, next slide, the focus of this study is to look at paradiplomatic efforts of sub-regional governments in the border spaces towards addressing irregular migration in South Africa. I would come back to this slide when I get there. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. All right, so what I've done here is to theorize paradiplomacy and region building. And one thing that paradiplomacy does is to enable subnational governments to take part, active part in international politics by engaging or partnering with their counterpart on the other side of the border, either continentally or beyond the continent. And concepts such as globalization and decentralization, they've facilitated subnational government to actually be able to take part in this space, so that they can also bring about development in their spaces. And as we all know, border spaces are kind of marginalized. And in Africa, we have a lot of examples of this. Specifically in South Africa, the Gauteng province have been able to engage in sort of partnering with cities beyond Africa, even into the West, to bring about policies that can facilitate trade and development on a cross-border level within those cities and within the border regions. Also within the border regions, we've had policies such as the Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park, which served as a nexus to attract not just tourism, but to facilitate trade in South Africa, between South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. And looking at region building, it relates to the intentional activity of nations to establish diplomatic connections with state and nations beyond their geographical locations due to similar political views on key issues. So in Africa, we have the African Union, which most of the things which they do is based on Pan-Africanism. And when we talk about Pan-Africanism, we refer to a political or cultural ideology, which despite the diversities that exist on the continent, have decided to set aside these diversities and encourage, a unified Africa, just to facilitate regional integration and development within the African continent. And if we look at the European Union as well, which actually serves as a good template, a lot of cross-border activities or collaborations go on within the EU. And some of these things are policies which the African continent tries to mirror on the continent. Policies such as the African Union Protocol on Free Movement of Persons, the African Continental Trade Agreement, these are policies or initiatives that are meant to bring about a borderless Africa or unified Africa as the African Union wants it. The African Union has also mandated all its 8 regional economic communities to initiate a kind of policies that will facilitate trade and movement of people within themselves. So you have policies such as the ECOWAS Protocol on Free Movement, and you have some of these in other regions, in other regional economic communities. However, they largely remain unimplemented. So when we look at some of these paradiplomatic efforts by subnational governments, even though they are meant to facilitate development, within their spaces, they kind of also support region building on a larger scene within the sub-region and also the continent at large. Next slide. And then looking at regional integration initiatives and intra-regional mobility within the SADC region. I think I've mentioned that on a larger scale, but within the SADC region now, there is the protocol on free movement, which came into being in 2005, but till date, it largely remains unimplemented because some countries have decided not to ratify. And South Africa happens to be one of those nations that have done that. So what they have done is to between countries. So for example, Zimbabwe has an agreement with South Africa to allow their citizens come into South Africa and stay for a period of 90 days. So you have those kind of agreements, but largely movement still remains impeded in a way because the documents that are needed are not easy to acquire by people, by Zimbabweans. They are not easy to come by. And some even have a mindset to say, why do I need a passport to move? Or why do I need a document to move? So some would not even attempt. Some have argued that these documents are expensive to get and they don't need that to happen. So they don't need to take that. So a lot of factors contribute to this. Next slide, please. So when we look at some paradiplomatic efforts of subnational government in tackling irregular migration in South Africa, we have, okay, let me say this. All right, so my focus mainly is the Limpopo province because like I said earlier on, this is the region where you have a lot of irregular movements happening between Zimbabwe and South Africa. So I'm trying to look at those efforts which have been put in place by the Limpopo province to address, illegal. There are memorandum of understandings that have been signed between the province of Limpopo and neighboring towns in Zimbabwe. and in Mozambique as well. And there is also the Trans-Limpopo Spatial Development Initiative, which is also a product of a memorandum of understanding signed between the Limpopo province, Bridge is in South Africa, and then the city of Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and there are a host of others. The aim is to coordinate efforts to enhance socio-economic infrastructure and socio-cultural conditions amongst the members for broader development. Part of this initiative is regulation of labor migrants from the nations of Zimbabwe and Mozambique into Limpopo province. There is also international development partnerships with nations like China, India, and countries in Latin America to expand mining, tourism, agriculture, and mineral resources in the province of Limpopo. And when you look at that region, you have a lot of economic activities going on, mining activities, a lot of 2 minutes. Okay, next slide. All right, so these are just to reel out some of those collaborations which exist between subnational governments and their counterparts on the other side, and even beyond Africa. But mainly what they try to do is to enhance local economy, which is the reason why paradiplomacy of migrants within that space. So although these developments are capable of addressing the fears of big economies like South Africa, as well as nations like Botswana, Namibia, and Lesotho over the influx of irregular and illegal migrants, increasing the unemployment demography in the country, they tend not to be in tandem with the direction which the national government is taking in addressing irregular migration. So if I take you back to the image that I showed, I said that you now have a situation where the approach which the government has embarked on in addressing this issue is to fortify the borders by putting up a wall to stop this. But in actual sense, it has not helped. You have people still crossing the borders one way or the other, cutting the fence, which the government has actually admitted, but they still go ahead to do that. But what is being done at the local level is to understand the dynamics, the history of the people, and to understand that you cannot really stop these people from moving. What you can do is to see how you can incorporate them into the system and to make sure that they are all accounted for. So what they are doing is to see how they can regulate their activities and make sure that companies on the side of South Africa, in Limpopo and in other parts of the Gauteng province, can facilitate the movement of these people, establish more businesses, and solve that issue of fear being entertained by the national government. So in conclusion, so subnational governments are challenged in one way or the other, ranging from low support from the national government to low publicity on the work that they do in curbing irregular migration. So non-involvement of key institutions and stakeholders as the subnational governments in the process of domesticating continental and sub-regional initiatives, which makes implementing these policies difficult as key stakeholders do not take ownership of such initiatives. And then there is the need for national government to adopt all-inclusive strategy or, okay, that's supposed to be bottom-top approach such that all concerned parties are invited to the table when issues of national concern such as migration, security, cross-border trade, tourism are to be decided. And also it's imperative to acknowledge the initiatives evolved and carried out by subnational governments by way of properly and adequately documenting and publicizing them, specifically the national government and various institutions, agencies, and NGOs concerned with migration, refugees, and asylum processes on the continent of Africa, but most importantly within the Southern African region. Thank you very much.
Could I ask already Ludmila to come down? Thank you for your insights in a different continent. I noted that you didn't mention that much technology and security. It is somewhat implicitly, I think that's good. I would also say maybe do not look too much at the EU. I don't think that's that much a picture perfect anymore when it comes to integration, but it's the same issue. So thank you again. One urgent question, and then the rest we can, if there is one, then we can move to the lunch as well, have your discussion, and maybe at other instances. Yep.
So the question that comes to mind is, what you discuss is two different levels of government, right? The national level and then the regional, local level. And in a way, you're discussing some things that Todd was also discussing, is that how do we scale up or scale down, and the relationship between, the formal partnership, but also the way people, decision makers, engage with each other so that those partnerships work. Could you elaborate a little bit on this?
Okay. I would say that the dynamics is quite different on the continent of Africa. And one thing which I've discovered is the fact that some of these partnerships do exist, but in the process of implementing them, it becomes difficult because the people who are sort of going to be involved in actually implementing these things are not being carried along. So when these policies come into place, that aspect of bringing in the people who are the grassroots to see to the implementation process of these policies makes it difficult for them to be implemented. And I think from my study, I discovered that not acknowledging the historical background or whatever I can, I don't have the right word now. Not accepting or not putting into consideration that history of where the people are coming from and why you have those kind of movements happening within that region makes it difficult for anything which is being done at the national level to succeed. So hence, I'm suggesting that there should be a kind of collaboration, true collaboration, where parties from or actors from the regional or local levels are being involved in this process. And even the local people also have to be involved so that different perspectives can be put in place to really, really look at how these policies can work. Because if it's being left at the level of the national, then it's not going to work without bringing in the local actors. I'm not sure if I answered it.
Thank you. I'm sorry that we have to cut you back a bit, maybe with all the questions, but we have to move on. I think, by the way, this is also part maybe of the worldwide quilt that we were talking about, of mobility. That there is no one approach, no one solution. So in that sense, I think it's an interesting addition. Then we continue with Lyudmila Progonyuk from Nikolaev National Agrarian University, who's going to talk about problems of cross-border security in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine.
Okay, so thank you. My topic reported the problems of cross-border security in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Ukraine is a country located in Eastern Europe with a population of about 33 million people. Ukraine has a complicated history as it has been under the rule of various empires and states for centuries. In 1991, Ukraine declared its independence from the Soviet Union. Since then, Ukraine has been striving for close ties with the European Union. In 2014, Ukraine signed the Association Agreement with the EU, which includes provision in economic